I will shift your attention now to design, which is very much correlated to this triple that we learned about with arts, technology, and science. So I'm head of the Design Research Lab in Berlin at the University of the Arts, and we are very much engaged into human-computer interaction and into wearable computing and into design for social change. I'm also engaged as a political actor on the European level, so I'm the so-called digital ambassador of the German federal government, translating backwards and forwards the digital agenda from Berlin to Brussels and back. So I want to talk with you about social design as a catalyst for participation in the digital society. So maybe, my aim is maybe to change and transform your understanding of design that you have now. Maybe like in 20 minutes you will have a new dimension of the role of design that it can play in the society. So we heard in the last 2 days many things about the Internet of Things. And this is an impressive number. 50 billion devices will be connected to the Internet in the year 2020. This is at least what Cisco, a study made by Cisco is informing us about. So 50 billion devices will be connected to the Internet. So much more than we have people living on this planet. So how will this connected world will look like? So this is an image that we made. So when we have this vision of the Internet of Things, there will be smart cities, there will be smart villages that we heard about yesterday. So everything will be connected. It's not just the famous refrigerator that maybe orders its own food in your kitchen, but it's the whole infrastructure that we have. And there's a huge potential of efficiency of resources, for example, of mobility resources, of water resources, of energy resources, when we collect this data and when we, make more efficient processes. And this means, that everything literally is connected, so that we have sensors not only in the vehicles and in the buildings, but also, for example, in the bridges, measuring the traffic that is going over the bridges and making sure that they are still safe and secure. So this is maybe a futuristic image of the smart cities, but maybe also soon, so over time, it will become reality. But this vision of smart cities and of a connected world also poses really very groundbreaking questions to us. For example, who owns all this data? And who has access to all this kind of data? And connected to these fundamental questions, how do we overcome the digital divide of those people who have access to this data and those who don't? And do we provide alternatives? Or is there just, as this image suggests, this one cloud where maybe just the big companies have access to and can make also business models and money with this data and create meaning from this data? Or do we have a kind of public access to all this data that is around in a smart city? So maybe we could think about an hypothesis that data is a public good. How would this future look like if specific kinds of public data is also accessible for the public? So data as a public good. And this sheds new light on the value of commons. So is it kind of a common good that we share all this kind of data in this network society? So this is very much linked to all those terms that we talk about: open data, open source, and open access. So this would be a so-called open everything strategy. So open data is slowly evolving in the European countries, but very, very slowly. So there's not a real push also from society or from citizens to really make this data accessible, because everybody, so all the startups and all the citizens could create their own meanings or also their own business models based on open data, but they could also have a look and have a say in, for example, public spending if all the data would be accessible, if we have an open data policy. Open source is for me really a big source of innovation, because open source is accessible, is usually very cheap, and I will show you some examples of open source technology. And open access is the way to access every kind of knowledge, also everywhere for everybody and mostly for free. So this is very much a visionary approach to this network society. And we should really start discussing the ethics of data usage. If we have this visionary approach of the network society, we should definitely start talking about a code of conduct of data usage. So there are many downsides of our digital society. For example, that the digital divide is widening. So it's not closing slowly, but it's really widening. So into people who don't have access to the digital world, and there are different reasons for this digital divide. So for example, some of the people are afraid of the misuse of their data. So there's a lot of debate also happening currently in Europe of, who owns my data, who has access to my data, how is my data used, do I pay with my data? Do I have a choice whether I give my data away or, is there any alternative? And people lack the digital skills to engage in today's society. So even if they would have access to the internet or they would have the tools, maybe they don't know how to use it properly. So there's a huge knowledge gap. And of course, broadband access is still a scarce resource. So how do we overcome also this infrastructure debate? And so many first agenda would be we need an international data governance. So is there any kind of international regulation on international concept of data governance that we could think of? And can we provide internationally free access to this public data? And can we push the companies to push or to open up their governance structure and have transparency about data usage of companies and institutions? We have to push forward also from citizens' perspective the discourse about the value of data. So how much do I pay with my data? What's the value? Is it kind of monetary value, or do I want to donate my data, for example, my body data, to medical research, for example? So is there a kind of trading and a kind of understanding of the value of data? And at the same time, do we have space for data-driven innovation? Because of course this is a big field for creating value and also for creating new businesses. So do we solve all those issues? I will jump into 3 topics a bit deeper. So the first one is infrastructure, then we talk about participation, and the third one is education. So, and this is also my understanding of what value design can bring to those questions and what kind of arguments design can bring to those scenarios. So infrastructure could not only be the internet, but it could be do-it-yourself offline networks and community wireless networks. So this is an understanding that everybody can create his or her intranet. So it's not the internet, but it's a network that you can create on your own. So this is a very easy sketch of how this would look like. So this would be a kind of local hotspot, a local network that everybody of us in this room can create on his or her own. And the difference is, on the left-hand side, we see those centralized spaces where all the data is stored. So this is the backbone of the internet. And on the right-hand side, you see very cheap digital open source technology that you need to create your own kind of network. So you don't need the backbone of the internet, but you can create your own kind of local network. So that's very handy, it's very cheap, it's very accessible. And this accessibility comes also from these cheap technologies. They are open source. So on the right-hand side, you see the Arduino Uno. On the left-hand side, you see the Raspberry Pi. So these are very powerful mini computers that all of you can use because the knowledge is on the internet. It's all open source, and there's a whole kind of community creating those pieces of technology that you can use them to create your own network that you need to provide your information. And in those networks, you own your data. So you don't have to give them away to big companies, but you own your data, you share your data with your local network, and then you can control your data. There's a lot of artistic interventions gathering around this topic. So this is a wonderful example of Aram Bartol. So this is a very local file server. So you have to stand very close to it. Another answer to this course is by Wachter and Joost. The situation was that the US embassy was spying out Angela Merkel, so our chancellor's smartphone from the local embassy in Berlin. And there was a huge debate, a huge public debate about spying of the US embassy. And so those two artists, they created a local wireless network, a do-it-yourself local wireless network, just next to Chancellor Merkel's residency. So the building in the background is Chancellor Merkel's residency. So it was a kind of ironic answer to this spying, because this is really low-tech what they use, but it's just locally accessible, this network. So you could access this network, you could provide data through this network, but maybe also they could do a kind of spying to Angela Merkel again. So there was a kind of artistic, ironic answer to this spying activities. And so all the topics that are engaged into this discourse from design and arts is about ownership of data, about proximity, so the physical space is very important when you want to access these kind of networks. It's about accessibility, who has access, and it's just the people who are there in physical proximity. It's about the independence from this huge mega infrastructure of the internet. And it's about privacy, so if I want to control my data and own it, then I can create these networks. And it's about resilience, what kind of, maybe those little networks are very robust compared to the big kind of centralized infrastructures. And they create alternatives and narratives. And then, we can shift this image of the centralized backbone of the internet to a maybe, local and maybe a bit brighter future. Because these were also the starting situations when the internet, was created. Everybody hooked up to the internet. It was a very decentralized structure, so maybe we can come back to this vision again with those do-it-yourself networks. If you want to learn more about this, there's one project that we did that's called MASI. It's a European research project that we are engaged in, and it's a do-it-yourself toolkit. So if you want to start your wireless network, just go to our website and you can just do it. And it's, of course, it's all open source, it's low cost, it's community-driven, and the value is really that you create your own, maybe also rural network or neighborhood network based on these kinds of technologies. And so it's a toolkit for your digital sovereignty. So, gain again the power to engage in the digital society, but behaving to your rules. And build your own networks. So maybe that's your task for the evening. The second chapter that I want to a bit more elaborate on is tools for participation. Participation is very, very important, and it's changing radically. So these were just some images where we try to engage with people, with very different citizens, with very different groups of people into this international discourse and making them part of this digital network and of the digital society and, bridging this digital divide. So forms of participations are radically changing. We all observed, for example, the role of social networks in the Arab Spring or in different political movements. Social participation through the networks play a very important role. And people, of course, want to have a say in the political debates, but the forms of having this saying are also very much changing. Also, the younger generation, they have very different approaches to engaging into debates. It's very much internet-driven and community-driven, and we should really open up for those new forms of participation. Bottom-up initiatives gain more and more power, and they are complementary to the top-down initiatives and to the institutions, but maybe they are also stronger and more dynamic than the top-down initiatives. So there's a huge power in those bottom-up initiatives. So social networks became a political battlefield, of course, and that's also why many countries in this world also censor and block different social platforms. So, this is the reason is this battlefield. So we have all this debate, and I talked about the digital divide, and we had a little project that we were starting off in Berlin. We were engaging with elderly citizens, so with senior citizens, and discussing those new forms of participation and asking them, how they want to have a saying in these debates and how they want to engage in the digital society. And what was very interesting is that they said, well, it's very interesting what we are talking about, all this Facebook stuff and Twitter and so on, but I don't have a computer. and I don't know how to use these tools, and I'm too old to learn it, so I don't want it. And we said, well, that's a valid argument. So we said, okay, we have to, turn the perspective, switch the perspective, and say, what are your interfaces and tools for engagement and for communication? And that's why we started a little experiment together with them. And that's a little video about it. So we took a letterbox, a very simple thing that everybody knows how to engage with. So just writing a postcard, for example. So we had this little postcard saying what I would like to change in my neighborhood. And this lady is saying, I would like to build a wood workshop in my neighborhood, for example. So exchanging ideas for the network in the neighborhood. So she just puts the postcard into the letterbox. And then magically it appears on the screen, so very easy. And it's very easy, so it's a hardware hack. It just takes a picture of the postcard and puts it up on a blog on the internet. So it has an own WLAN router, and so this is just the blog that you can scroll through. So it's a kind of an analog Twitter, so it's very easy. And the fun part is also that you can access this information very locally, but it's also connected to the internet, so you can post it also on Twitter. So we use this tool very often also in situations like this at a conference where we ask for participation or for an opinion or for whatever. So there's a very low barrier to write a little comment on the postcard, put it into the letterbox, and then you can share it over the internet via Twitter or via Facebook as a post, but also share it locally. So it's a kind of a switch between the analog and the digital world. And this is what we learn from the senior citizens. We have to, put our perspective into their mindset, into their everyday life experience, into the skills that they have. And so really to provide those tools from their perspective. And of course, we made a little tour with this hybrid letterbox, how we call it, and we used it as a public installation. So this is in Berlin-Neukölln. That's a kind of very mixed and diverse neighborhood with low income, with people with various national backgrounds. And we ask, there's a specific street that's called Sonnenallee, so the Sunshine Alley, and it's a kind of tough neighborhood. So we asked the neighbors, write a letter to your street. So this postcard starts with, Dear Sonnenallee, you would, or you are. And so people were writing a postcard to their street. And that was really beautiful because it was not only, as you see, the elderly people engaging into this interaction, but also the kids or the families or just, people passing by, because it's really a low barrier to have this interaction. And so people started identifying themselves with their local community, and they were writing about their wishes or their identification with the local neighborhood, and they started chatting with each other and started to interact with their neighbors. And this is how communities start. This is how we build bridges between people and how we build bridges between the analog and the digital world. So this is also all open source. It's very easy to build a letterbox on your own. If you want to find the recipe and the code, it's all online. So everybody could start a kind of little neighborhood initiative to create cohesion in local neighborhoods. So participation is about building bridges between the analog and the digital. It's to overcome the digital divide and to include people with low digital skills, because there are many, and the number is also growing because the development is so fast. So we really have to think about them, how to get them on board, and give access to everyone through very different interfaces and very different kinds of interaction. My last kind of little chapter is about digital education. Everybody, from kids to elderly, needs digital education. And this is a very pressing question here in India, but also in Europe. So we have to find ways to provide digital education. Of course, we all know it's the basis for future jobs. It's for participation in a connected world and individuals' digital sovereignty. So if we don't do something in this area for digital education, we will see that this digital gap is still widening. So this is really a risk. So we need to give access to knowledge, tools, and teaching. And I'm a very pragmatic person. So we had a lot of talking from politicians that we need digital education, but not much is happening, to be honest, also not in Germany. So we just started an initiative. We need digital education from elementary school on. And so I'm part of a kind of little non-for-profit initiative. So we just build it, we are just building a little tool for school children. And this is the Calliope, and I've got one here. So this is a computer. So this is the size of a computer. So very tiny little one. And the idea of this little computer is very easy. So it's a low-cost mini computer. So it costs like, in the production, it costs like €15. So it's really very cheap. It's all open source, so you can also build it on your own. It includes learning material as open educational resources, so it's all for free. And there are many workshops and MOOCs also for teachers, so that they can, have the, they can access the knowledge how to use this in their teaching. We just started this initiative, and we started the rollout in Germany this year and in the next year for 3rd grade of elementary school. So it's very, very easy to build something with this. And the press, the media attention was really, really great. So it's really wonderful. So they said that this mini computer could revolutionize the school system, because you can program it on your own, just using a smartphone, for example. And the programming language is a visual language. So it's just kind of a visual Lego building blocks. So it's just kind of plug and play. So everybody can do it, and everybody in this room can code with this kind of little mini computer. So very, very easy and handy. And but still, it's a kind of maybe I could say it's a piece of high tech also, because it's got many opportunities inside. So it's got a little LED matrix that you see blinking here, so you can write letters, you can provide icons or numbers or whatever. It has different switches and buttons. It has an accelerometer, so it can measure the speed, for example. It has an antenna and a loudspeaker. You can connect any kind of sensors to it. So this can be a part of the Internet of Things. You can sense the air quality, for example, when you run through Mumbai with this little fellow. So it's really easy, to become part of the digital society by just using this kind of technology. And it's also, opening up the black box of the computers, because this is the heart piece of any computer. So there's a tiny little processor in it, and so that people, and especially school children, can see, this is already a computer. It's not this big box or this laptop, but this is already a piece of technology that they can control. And this is the mind shift that we have to engage in, that school children learn that they not only can use or consume digital content, but they can create digital content. And that's easy and accessible, and programming is something that everybody can learn. So the Calliope Mini supports this playful hands-on experience with technology, and it's also something for boys and for girls alike. It trains creativity, analytical reasoning, and first steps of coding. And so the first, school children are at the age of 7 or 8, and they can do it. If you observe them when they have this little mini computer in their hand, they just start off. So they just do their first programming within minutes. It's amazing, because they are so curious and so playful. They don't think much about it, but they just do it. And so it has all these kinds of technology inside, so you can really have this kind of little mini computer until you graduate, so you can do a lot of things with it. And you can discover and program the digital and physical world with this kind of little device. And so, it's cheap, it's open source, so we should go for this as a very pragmatic tool for providing digital education. So to summarize my vision of design and social design that they can play in this diverse field of the digital society. So we should not only include the digital elite. This is a very important point, not to widen the digital gap. Enable people to create their own infrastructure and their tools for participation. So it's really this decentralized bottom-up initiatives are crucial to have some answers for those discourses forces that we were just talking about. Creating inclusive interfaces and bridging the gap between analog and digital. So think about many, many opportunities and many interfaces for bridging these gaps and to include people with very diverse skills and very diverse expectations. And shifting the authorship also to local actors. So the local becomes very, very crucial again, and they should, become the authors of their kind of own digital networks and the digital tools, because they are also ambassadors for the transformation. Designing scalable tools and processes, this is what I mean also when I talk about open source, because this is really scalable and accessible, so that people all over the world can use it. And so the agenda is really fight for citizens' digital sovereignty. That's it. Thank you.